Appreciate everyone being here. This is going to be a very exciting session, focusing in on bicycle ped infrastructure. But we have a great lineup today with Shaun and Ron and Brent. Hopefully will show up. We haven't found him yet. And at the same time, his PowerPoint is also corrupted. So internally, I'm having a bit of a freak out. So first, if I find the presenter, that's a huge plus, right? And then I'll figure out the PowerPoint thing. But with that said, we're going to go ahead and kick off the session with Shaun going first. So Shaun joined the Atlanta Beltline in 2013 as a senior transportation engineer. He is currently the project manager for the Northeast Trail design effort. He is the technical point of contact for most of ABI's partner agency, including MARTA, Atlanta DOT, and GDOT. Mr. Green's professional career is focused on urban, multimodal transportation systems. Before joining ABI, he spent 10 years with the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority and worked as a consulting traffic engineer prior to that. He is a graduate of the prestigious North Avenue Trade School. And if anyone doesn't know what that is Georgia Tech. Here in Atlanta. So he's also been a bike commuter since 1994. So he's seen our system kind of transform over the years. So yes. He plays beer league ice hockey, a drummer with his bandmates, and believes himself to be funnier than he actually is. But I think you're decently funny, yeah. Yeah, and he and his wife have 3 daughters. So with that, welcome up Shaun in his presentation with a street without cars. Thank you.
Okay, the marketing machine says I'm the guy with the hat. Can I ditch it? Who's a Red Sox fan? Good morning. Down goes up. Okay. So thank you for ditching the traditional Georgia ITE presentations for this one. I think Ron and Shaun, it rhymes. Come on. I mean, why wouldn't you be here? You guys caught what Clyde said the other day, so I'm going to blow through this. The takeaway here is, and Clyde focused on glorified sidewalk with kind of an ew kind of a thing. You know, I don't go there. It's a street without cars. And I call it that, we call it that, because it is an economic development program beyond all other things. Yes, it's infrastructure. Yes, it's a social program or a set of social programs. But the overall program of projects is intended to be an economic development basis for everything. So those of you not from, yes? Oh, my bad. Sorry to our friends online. I've been on mute. Okay, we'll do it this way. For those of you not from Metro, you can kind of get a basis as to where Atlanta Beltline is within the footprint of the city of Atlanta, within the footprint of Fulton County. And then from a green space and, is there a laser? Ooh. From a, from a green space and whatnot, activity centers locations, you can get a sense as to where the Beltline is in terms of its geography. From an org chart perspective, we are an implementation agent of the city of Atlanta, spun out of the redevelopment powers of Invest Atlanta, the Atlanta Development Authority. We also have a sister agency called the Atlanta Beltline Partnership. That is the 501c3, so that's where most of the philanthropic donations go through that Clyde was alluding to the other day. But they also do the programming. So yoga in the park, there was a 8K on the Westside on Thursday of last week, Friday of last week, maybe Saturday. So those are the kind of things that the partnership does. Atlanta Beltline Inc., we are, like I said, the implementation agent, so we're the ones responsible for the infrastructure. We're also responsible for the housing. We're also responsible for the workforce development. We have partners that help us to do this. So from From a trees perspective, Trees Atlanta is our partner. They're doing the linear arboretum around the Beltline. Path Foundation is one of our trail partners. Actually, GDOT's one of our trail partners too. I was wondering why I was getting louder. And so MARTA is our transit partner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see what it takes, though, is a lot of faith, trust, and some pixie dust to get this all to come together. Now, it's not a new thought. This is from 1961 in the Atlanta Regional Commission plan for MARTA when it was envisioning the rail system. So if you don't recognize, it's called Sears here because that's what it was. But this is Ponce City Market. This is the Beltline corridor over the top of Ponce, and some artistic renderings. Obviously, 1961. Everything is wicked future in terms of bubbles and awesome and awesome. But it's the iteration that we're working on is based upon Ryan Gravel's thesis, Georgia Tech grad student, 1999. So this is actually over 22, 23 years ago. It's actually kind of quick to think that somebody that wrote a thesis can then get it into not only city policy, but regional policy, and we'll get to that in a second. But basically what Ryan is saying in his thesis is that the center of Atlanta is the center of the region, and that the infrastructure that puts in place there needs to be something that the density of the city can build around for the next 50 to 100 years. Implementation is obviously different than the thesis. We have a 22-mile loop around the city of Atlanta. There's a lot of different constructs and contexts within that 22-mile loop. And not everything is going to be the same. Most people hear Beltline and they immediately think Eastside Trail over by Ponce City Market. But the Westside Trail is absolutely gorgeous. The Eastside Trail going through Reynoldstown on the other side of Halsey Yard and CSX rail to the south is stunningly beautiful. And again, though, it is set up to be an economic development program. So when we get to the thought that so many people have incorrectly that Beltline is a linear park, it is not. It is a transportation corridor. But because of the way we've set it up, it's trail. We're planning the streetcar with MARTA. There's tons of places that we have created and designed very, very intentionally. Beltline is a street. It just happens to be a street without cars. And so from a streets perspective, you can see Atlanta here. Let's go 1871. Seems like a good year for that. Somewhere in the 50s, prior to that, and maybe in the 20s. These are the streets of Atlanta. Lots of commerce, lots of activity. It's multimodal in this particular instance. But streets with vehicles are, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively new construct. Blah, 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 blah. There has to be a quotation here somewhere, right? Otherwise, we don't get our PDHs. But basically, a street can be as simple as a level patch of dirt, right? But it's intended to be a place for meeting. It's a place for interaction. It's a place for commerce. And so we differentiate that from roads, which are primarily moving people, mobility. Streets are about access and public interaction. And so, sans people, these are all streets, and they happen to be thousands of years old, right? So well before the formation of Henry Ford, Daimler-Benz, all of that stuff. But then when you bring people into it, you have a much different feel and a much different look on things. And so I present to you Beltline. This is Eastside Trail. This is Ford Factory Loft over here. Ponce City Market is on this side. It's the street without cars. It's intentional to be this way. Again, this is probably actually just a week ago with the opening up of the Beltline Marketplace underneath Freedom Parkway. Again, lots of interactions, lots of people, and the street, yeah, it's a little congested. So be it. So why are we doing all this? And Clyde got at this a little bit the other day, but I'll take it maybe a little bit farther. projections for the city, well, for Metro Atlanta, right, is we're on the order of, say, 6 million people, round numbers right now. City of Atlanta is around 500,000. So we're, what is that, 8, 9%, something like that. We're a donut hole. But the intention is to grow. So if we've got the existing regional population, the growth of the region, the growth of the city to 1.2 million people, if it gets to 8 million and 15% of that, right? So it's basically doubling the percentage of the city of Atlanta. How do you want to frame that development? How do you want people to move to the city of Atlanta and have it still work, right? And so from a population perspective, Atlanta now in terms of dots in density, and then Atlanta in the future, it's still not all that far off from some place like DC. Obviously we're not Paris, right? We're not looking for that. And so from a city planning perspective and trying to figure out how this could actually look, this is the Kroger City Center down off Cascade on Southwest Atlanta. The purple is Beltline, yellow is a new street connecting to existing streets, and the red is some underutilized property. It's a sea of asphalt in front of a big box store. The Donley Garden apartments are very well, they're nice, but they're underutilized from a density perspective. And so you can get everything in there and a whole lot more, and be able to provide a lot more people a lot of opportunity for office space, retail space, to start up their businesses, places to live, much more so than you have, especially in a sea of parking. Similarly, this is down off University Avenue, and this is Norfolk Southern coming across here off of Hank Aaron. You get same kind of deal, purple's the Beltline. Red is underutilized properties, and you can create something significantly different than what's there now, much more an urban environment. But we're not talking about some of the crazy shit that's been done in the past. This is Boston over time, so all of this was harbor, right? That's Back Bay, Boston. That's like some of the prime real estate within the city is all built on fill, right? Or New York, right? This is New York prior to the, 1811 plan, and this is what Manhattan looks like. They terraformed it. That's not what Beltline's looking to do, right? But as I was saying, we got into regional policy relatively fast from a graduate thesis to city policy. Walk, Bike, Thrive from Atlanta Regional Commission puts Beltline as the hub of the regional trail network as it gets as it explodes outward, hopefully. Transit history with the streetcar network in 1902 that is. You got Fort Mac down here, Piedmont Park up here. For context, in 46, this is basically not too far before they shut the whole damn thing down. But you can see that Atlanta actually had a really, really expansive streetcar network. Well, the transit planning for the region with Concept 3 back in 2011 or 12, this blow up here gets you to the Beltline and this green loop around all of what's going on inside the Beltline. And then the city has the streetcar system plan as its policy for showing that meso layer of transit between, we've got the MARTA heavy rail, which is fantastic, and we've got the MARTA local bus service, which is pretty damn good too, and it's the workhorse. Manjeet said yesterday, the local bus system carries more people than the heavy rail does. But there's nothing in between, and so that's part of what this is getting at here, and that's where the Beltline can help to further that. Not only, and nobody wants to go in a 22-mile loop, right? Nobody goes and drives around 285, so please don't look at it like that. This is a bunch of, you've got some legs that make sense, and then you use the spurs or the spokes to come inboard and outboard of the hub. And you can see that there's a pretty significant history within just the last 20 years of Beltline transit planning. You've got a thesis in 99, but there's been something that's been going on just about every single year ever since, right? And then when you look at the city of Atlanta, and this graphic is pre-COVID, but it's probably not much different. In fact, it may have, the line from 10 to 4 may be shifting south and west. But you can see where the high-paying jobs are and where the more affordable housing are, and then the disconnect in between. And so one of the things that Beltline always does is it focuses on the equity side of things because Atlanta is such a disparate place, let's call it that. The difference the difference in geography between the haves and the have-nots is not significant, but the difference between what the haves have and what the have-nots don't is significant. And so just a couple examples here. Households without a car in green, there's that 10 to 4 line that kind of cuts through the city. And then from a jobs perspective, basically it's the same line, just the haves on one side, the have-nots, so to speak, on the other. This is a lot more stark when you start to quantify that instead of just look at it spatially. Employment rate on average is 86%, again, pre-COVID. But you can see how that breaks down from an African American, API, Latino, and white. There's some pretty significant differences between what's going on in this group of races versus Black Atlanta, and that's also characterized in the actual income streams as well. So from an impact perspective, you saw kind of an offshoot of this photo yesterday, but it's been turned into, in 2017, this was number 7 out of 10 for splash pads in the country. So it's great. Now, I've gotten some feedback recently that there needs to be some maintenance. That's without argument. And I guess one of the things I'll say to that is, one of the charges that Atlanta Beltline Inc. has is as a result of the funding streams that we have and our purview for capital infrastructure investment and delivery, maintenance is not our responsibility. So what we do is we do contracts for infrastructure delivery that have a 2-year warranty, so to speak, that the contractor is responsible for maintenance for the first 2 years. And that's the way that the city of Atlanta, in this case Parks and Rec, would be able to, start to put into their budget to be able to start to maintain the stuff that we're delivering. We're giving them a 2-year window to do it. Now that's not to say that the powers that be at City Hall are giving them the funding stream that they need to do that maintenance, but there was at least some deliberateness to what we're doing. This is big infrastructure. You wouldn't know it from walking on it, especially if you've ever called it a glorified sidewalk. There's millions of dollars of stuff underground that you just don't see, won't see, can't see. But we're also dealing with, it's a design for humanity much more so than anything else. And so if you're curious as to what it might look like with respect to transit, I Skyped this from one of Marta's presentations. But you can see that the intention is to have maybe not a full grass track where it's grass everywhere, but if we can get some of that, what would otherwise be a gravel ballast bed or a full embedded slab, neck that down as much as possible and green the insides and outsides of it. But you can see that it is not overwhelming to the overall situation of, a 100-foot wide corridor in this particular location. And that's Ponce in the background, by the way. And then safety, right? So from a perspective of trail users, having 3/4 of the trail crossings grade separated is huge. That also means that some of our capital money gets spent building that vertical circulation between the public roadway network and the trail that goes up over the top of it or down underneath it. Anybody else from Boston? Okay, who wants to say this? Wicked pissed. And then this is the gratuitous before and afters. This is Rathbun Stakes here and the Cotton Dock Lofts over on this side. And Ladybird over on the Eastside Trail. What a difference, right? Nefarious acts, people having fun. The Ponce Bridge, Ford Factory Lofts, right? Not only was this bridge rehabilitated in place with new steel welded in, grind, paint to match kind of a thing, we also had to lift it up so that it was at least the minimum height above Ponce to meet current state standards. This is new, the Southside Trail down at Pittsburgh Yard. So if you were to extend McDaniel Street south, you'd basically end up in the pond here. And this heads south underneath the railroad court. So it's not exactly before and after, because this is taken from on the top of the railroad bench. This is down at the bottom of it. But you get the point. You can see the billboard, and that's the old Whale building. And this is what the Pittsburgh Yard has turned it into. This is the bridge over Metropolitan Parkway, Stewart Avenue, for those of you that go way back. And now we've put in a new bridge immediately adjacent to this. This is Westview Drive. That's I-20 in the background on the west side. So again, before, after. We do a lot of public art, if you haven't noticed that from some of these photos yet. This is one of my favorite pieces, so to speak, just from I don't know, I always enjoyed melting crayons when I was a kid. So, but it's like, this is, obviously the art was there to kind of draw you to the corridor and draw you to the next part of the corridor. This is a construction photo when it's just about done, and this is a photo of having established. These are native grasses, they're not weeds yet. And again, from a heavy infrastructure perspective, it's just a staircase, but you see what goes into it, right? So we've got this gorgeous granite-clad stainless steel rail. We put in a lot of thought into our material palette on the front side of this, and we knew, and no digs on my friends at the City of Atlanta, it's just a function of what it is. The culture of Atlanta is not maintenance, right? And so we had to pick materials that we knew would survive a long time. And so granite, that's generational, right? Stainless steel, that's, we got a good 20 to 50 years out of that before we have to worry about it. So these are the kind of things that we did on the front side to make sure that shit would last. Oh, that's Lawton Street, by the way. And this is, you can see these two dudes down in the hole putting in the underground detention retention systems. People have been draining to the railroad for the last 100, 150 years, round numbers. We're not exempt from dealing with all of that. And the city's not going to go back and make everybody that's adjacent to it fix their drainage that they've had in place for the last 100 years. So we're having to do not just our own water quality, but we're having to deal with all the bypass that gets drained to us from offsite property. So we have a ton of money that goes into stormwater, and ultimately it goes to Department of Watershed Management for them to keep track of into the future. Oops. And then from a life cycle perspective, this is over the Westside Trail in Washington Park. That's what was there. So the rail, this is the old freight rail. MARTA goes underneath with their blue and green line subway. When we were, this is hilarious to me still. When we were doing our design work for the Westside Trail project, which I think we opened in 16 or 17, survey work showed, an uncertain MARTA culvert. And so we went to MARTA and they're like, no, we never built it. And we found this photo after the fact. But they're like, no, we never built it. So we started excavating and we found it. And it's sitting right, there might be, there's a waterproof layer, but there might be 10 or 12 inches of soils between that waterproof layer, which is just sitting on the top of the MARTA tunnel. So we carefully removed this from the situation. And this is, what we ended up with is we've got a trail pour over the top of where that was, and then you can see, with our handrail. So life cycle, right? In terms of where we're going, I wanted to give you guys just a sense as to what's up. Our friends at Heath and Lineback are our consultant design engineer for the Northeast Trail, which is basically picking up from, this is the north point of Ansley Golf Club here. We go underneath the freeways, we go over Norfolk Southern, and we go over CSX and Peachtree Creek, and that's where we tie into the Northwest Trail, which is a partnership with the Path Foundation. But because of our regional connectivity, Path 400, South Fork Conservancy, Peachtree Creek Greenway all comes down in this vicinity here. And so we're carrying a spur trail to get out and make sure that we tie into that. Similarly, with a transit nexus, this is the MARTA heavy rail station at Lindbergh Center. So it would be, in my mind, just atrocious for us to not also have that connection as well. So the Beltline loop is basically here, but then we've got these spur trails to make sure that we get the regional connectivity. On the northwest side of things, we pick up at Huff Road and Marietta Boulevard. We've just done this construction here. It's not yet completely accepted, but we turned Marietta Boulevard from 5 lanes into 3 with a physical barrier that separates the Beltline Trail from that traffic. But the intention is to come cross-country and then ultimately get up and tie into the Northeast Trail up that way. Again, this is a partnership with Path Foundation. From a transit perspective, right now MARTA is in, they've delivered 30% plans. So we're trying to get out of planning and into engineering with respect to a locally funded streetcar extension, which comes off the existing downtown streetcar up onto the Beltline corridor and gets up to Ponce. 2027 revenue service. Beltline, actually probably within about a week, we are issuing an RFQ for transit planning and engineering services. MARTA has done some work over on the east side here in red. We've got a grant through the city of Atlanta from FTA for doing work here in green, and we've asked for a budget revision on that FTA grant to actually do the same scope, but to extend it another 8 miles so that there's a 13-mile corridor that we end up looking at there for, basically trying to figure out where the hell to put transit in the Northwest, because we do have 2 active rail. We don't have any abandoned railroad up in that quadrant of the network. And then to kind of reaffirm what's going on down here in terms of platform locations, vehicle maintenance facilities, all the ancillary stuff associated with a transit system. We do have some missing teeth within the network. This is over on the west side. You can see we come underneath RDA Cascade here, and then we bend out right at this point here. There's about 30 feet of right-of-way back here. We own it, but we didn't build the trail there. So this is Westside Trail, and it comes out to a West End Trail and runs up to Brown Middle School, and then gets on to, you can tell that I'm a great shot. But that's, Westside Trail here, Westside Trail here. We go on street for a little while because there were no eyes back here, and that was our biggest concern. There was no eyes, and anything we did back there was going to be throwaway because there was only 30 feet. So when we got the right-of-way for transit, everything we put back there would be blown up. But from a transit funding perspective, we were always kind of optimistic, and now we're a lot more realistic. And we are probably going to be trying to get this, 0.6 of a mile missing tooth put into place here before 2030. Another missing tooth is not part of the Beltline, but it's part of that regional connectivity. This is the Beltline Westside Trail here, and it comes up into Marietta Boulevard. This is a trail, the Westside Beltline connector, that runs into downtown, so there. And then this is the Proctor Creek Greenway. So the Bankhead MARTA station is right here with its tail track going north, coming south again into the main line that gets into Ashby Station. But this 1/3 of a mile would create a connectivity between the mainline Beltline Trail, the MARTA station at Bankhead, and the Proctor Creek Greenway. And it's right now a really kind of imposing situation where you've got a 4-foot bike lane adjacent to two 12-foot lanes that's on, US 278 is Hollowell Parkway, formerly Bankhead Avenue. One of the things that I think is a great, easy solution is to, use up the buffer and the bike lane, shift everything over a little bit, plant it so that there's a barrier, a buffer, whatever, and we can get a 10-foot trail on the backside of that, make that a wonderful connection, significantly safer than what's out there right now, and a lot more pleasant to use. So from a parks and trail perspective, Clyde had this up here yesterday. If anybody's got any questions, we can get into it. Our under construction stuff right now is we've got a federal aid project. I think it started in 2011. But that's a streetscape along Ponce. So when GDOT went through and redid the carriageway of Ponce, probably 10, 11 years ago at this point, and turned it from like some weird 7-lane section to a consistent 5-lane. So you got the two-way left turn lane, 2 lanes in each direction, and then buffered bike lanes on either side. That was absolutely amazing. This is the other half of that that's been lagging, obviously, from right-of-way perspective, from funding perspective, but it's to deal with everything outside the curb. So it's all streetscape, but we're also building a vertical connection between the Ponce sidewalk and the Beltline Eastside Trail elevation at that CVS there across from Ponce City Market. Again, transit program, you can see this line here is 2032. So you get a sense as to where the transit program is. It's a long-term venture, but that Streetcar East extension is, like I said, it's 5 years out on a 2027 timeframe. Hopefully we can beat that, and then that's what I've got for you. Thank you, guys.
All right. So I'm excited about our next presentation, mainly because Ron's a new member of the GDOT team as the bike ped engineer for the state, and already he's out of the gate working on some really great innovative things, and he's going to be able to showcase that today. Again, very excited about that. But let's get to your introduction so they know a little bit more about you. So I already said that. You're the state bike ped engineer for the Georgia Department of Transportation. He's also a graduate assistant at Georgia Tech, where he focuses on data science and transportation safety, with a goal of leveraging emerging technologies and analytic techniques to cut down roadway fatalities. And with that, he's going to talk about proactive measures to quantify and assess pedestrian safety. Come on up, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Sorry, I didn't realize we were doing introductions. Forgot about that for a second. So as Sam said, I'm the state pedestrian and bicycle engineer, but I'm also a student at Georgia Tech and a researcher, and that's where I focus on data science and emerging technologies. I'm excited to show what I've brought from school to GDOT in emerging technologies and data science techniques. So I'll be speaking on proactive safety assessments to quantifiably assess pedestrian safety. And with that comes near-miss analysis as well as predictive safety techniques. Down button. There we go. So I have 3 key takeaways for you guys today. One is that pedestrian crashes, they're inherently random events, but nevertheless, pedestrian fatalities, they're an increasing concern. 2, proactive approaches have become commonplace to assess pedestrian safety. And then 3, near-miss analysis and predictive safety analytics, they can be leveraged to use proactive safety assessments to make informed but yet data-driven proactive safety decisions. All right, so there's been an increasing proportion of our pedestrian fatalities in Georgia roadways over the last 15 years. Back in 2006, less than 10% of all of our roadway fatalities had a pedestrian involved. But nowadays, that number has become nearly 20%. And proactive safety techniques can be used to help mitigate these pedestrian crashes. Proactive safety entails, well, analyzing crashes as well as the roadway environment, and gauging risk, not just crashes, not reacting after they occur. So to illustrate what proactive safety is, I have a story for you guys. So being a government employee, I tend to get a lot of citizen requests. One guy calls me telling me to review the safety of a site. There's a concern there. I tell him, yes, sir, I'll take a look at the crash data. Proceeds to tell me a story about World War II planes. These old guys, they like to recant stories to me. Don't think he was in World War II either, but. So back in World War II, planes used to come back from battle with bullet holes in the wings and the center of the plane. Became obvious what needed to be done to reinforce this plane. Let's fix the wings and the center. But as it turned out, this was a fatal flaw. The engines in the cockpit were actually the most vulnerable parts of the plane, but when they were shot, those planes just never returned home. So pedestrian crashes, they're not bullet holes in a plane getting shot by German pilots. Nevertheless, it's an illustrative concept that we should be using more than just crash data to assess pedestrian safety. So that's because these crashes, they're inherently random events. There's a lot of events that occur on the roadway related to exposure, conflicts, and those crashes are just the tip of the pyramid. And a lot of those crashes are even underreported. Around 30% of pedestrian crashes go underreported. And those severe and fatal injuries, those are really the ones we care about. Those are, the tip of the pyramid. So we're dealing with limited data here, especially for pedestrian safety. So to illustrate that, I kind of have an intersection. Once I was asked to look at a site, and there's all sorts of vehicle crashes. Plenty of data to make an informed decision, tons of data points. But one data point for pedestrian crashes, one fatality though. So there's a safety concern at the intersection for pedestrians, nevertheless, only one data point. And it's really difficult to justify decisions with just one data point. Nevertheless, engineering judgment can be used, but it's a lot better to have these quantitative and data-driven methods for justifying improvements. So that brings me into surrogate measures for crashes that can be used alongside that crash data to help out. So that's the roadway environment and near misses. First, I'll discuss the roadway environment and how that can be used in a prediction model, where the roadway environment is used to predict those pedestrian crashes. So some measures of exposure. More exposure of pedestrians on the roadway, likely more crashes. We have things such as pedestrian counts, the number of transit stops on a route, the proximity to schools and grocery stores, all measures gauging more pedestrian exposure and have been correlated to pedestrian crashes and are statistically significantly correlated. But alongside exposure, there's risk factors. So risk factors meaning things like an undivided roadway, pedestrians not having that refuge in the center to cross, or faster driving speeds. When those crashes occur, they're often much more severe. And then there's also proximity to bars, clubs, etc., locations where the roadway users are likely are not driving as well. Alongside those risk factors, we have CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. So if you attended my last presentation, I brought this up. But now we've correlated CDC Social Vulnerability Index, kind of an overall measure of a variety of different demographic data, such as household income, minority status, access to transportation, amongst many others. This has been statistically significantly correlated to pedestrian severe injuries and fatalities. There's a GDOT publication coming out on this quite shortly, actually. So using those various risk factors as well as measures of exposure, they can be put into a prediction model. In traffic safety, we use the word safety performance function. That's all that means is we're predicting pedestrian crashes. So all those different risk factors are put into a model where the weights of that model is just their regression coefficients. That's those little A's in front of the variables there if you're not familiar with regression analysis. But sometimes equations, they're not practical for implementation. So we can do things like a table, an SPF table. It's just that a tabulated format of that equation. That allows you to visually see what type of roadways are more high risk than others. All right, so I just went through how the roadway environment can be used to help gauge pedestrian safety. So now I'll go through some near misses and how that can be used alongside crash data. So a near miss, it's simply a narrowly avoided collision. That's all you need to know about. There's different ways to get this information. So to illustrate a near miss, here's a video collected in a GDOT case study. A vehicle speeds through an intersection at 63 miles per hour, attempting to make a red light. This vehicle comes within 2 seconds of hitting a pedestrian. So this is a very clear safety concern, but nevertheless, this type of data doesn't show up in our analysis unless we're using software like near miss to detect these things. So you remember that 2 seconds I just said that avoid the collision? It's often called the post-encroachment time. So that's simply when one roadway user leaves a conflict point and before that next roadway user arrives at that conflict point. And I found a video online to help illustrate what post-encroachment time, or PET, is. So in this video here, a bicyclist travels through an intersection and comes to a conflict point. Shortly after, the vehicle crosses that same point. The time between those roadway users at that point is the post-encroachment time. But there's other ways to calculate near miss as well. So time to collision. Imagine that vehicle had slammed on their brakes and never got to that conflict point, or that post-encroachment time would have been really long because the vehicle slammed on their brakes. Well, the time to collision projects the initial vehicle's speed towards that conflict point. There's different ways to use these near misses, what this is illustrating, and how to calculate it. Wish I had a video of time to collision, but couldn't find one for you guys. So there's also different ways of collecting near miss data. You can use object detection and artificial intelligence, which is computer vision. So those circles that were on the screen and the lines, no one's drawing that. That's artificial intelligence. Additionally, there's vehicle events. So that's things such as harsh braking movements, where vehicles are slamming on their brakes and potentially getting close to another roadway user. So vehicle events such as harsh braking movements, there's been a correlation done to correlate those braking events to rear-end crashes. Nothing much on pedestrian at this point in time, so I'm still looking for that research and trying to utilize that type of data. But with object detection, there has been. So there's various ways to quantify that near-miss data. You know, it's not all the same. So in this figure here, you see, okay, those severe conflicts are ones where that post-encroachment time is less than 2 seconds. But the Swedish method here, they've got time to collision on the x-axis and vehicle speed on the y. So it's more of a spectrum of what's a severe conflict and what's not a severe conflict. But ITE, they like to get a little more complicated than that. More than just a table here. There's a complex equation. You don't need to read it now, but it takes all those different types of events on the roadway and computes a near-miss score and trying to quantify that data. Because right now, our crashes, we have an associated value to them, but no such thing exists for near-miss. So there's been various ways to compute that quantification of near-miss. And to show why it's important to quantify it, well, they're not all the same. In this video here, you'll see a vehicle drive and come within 2 seconds of hitting a pedestrian again. This time, the vehicle's only going at 8 miles per hour. If this conflict were to have occurred, it would not have been as severe. And we know this because there's been previously established data correlating speed of conflicts to risk of death and risk of severe injury. This is established methodologies with crash data as well, but can be leveraged for near miss. So in addition to near miss, we can do compliance analysis too. So same type of technology, but in this video here, you see the lights getting detected. And you also see the pedestrian crossing, and we know because of the light's color that, all right, the pedestrian's illegally crossing in this scenario. So this tells us, okay, we can adjust our countermeasures to try to, say, community engagement or shorten the signal timing to address this specific type of safety concern. GDOT's also done some projects with near miss in the past. So I've pulled a picture from Georgia Tech's research study where we've specifically assessed near miss for pedestrians mainly at mid-blocks. So in this figure here, the horizontal or blue lines are the pedestrian travels legally across a mid-block. The orange and vertical lines are pedestrians or vehicles traveling along the roadway. There's black and red dots illustrating the severe and not so severe conflicts between those two types of roadway users. This allows us to gauge where at the mid-block are the pedestrians crossing and where are they getting into conflicts with vehicles, so we can assess that compliance and try to implement things such as pedestrian refuge or pedestrian signals to help these pedestrians cross the roadway. We've also done a case study. In this here, we've compared near misses at an intersection to crashes at an intersection. Near miss through 24 hours of data and crashes over 9 years. So the first thing I notice in this figure is there's these crashes upstream of the intersection, and those conflicts don't exist on the near miss diagram. Okay, well that has to do with the camera angle. So we need to actually assess just upstream of the intersection as well to get those near misses recording conflicts outside of the intersection too, because the improvements would be the same nonetheless. Nevertheless, those conflicts within the intersection, they're pretty similar to the conflicts that occurred with collisions in the intersection. These are all pedestrians, by the way. The same type of analysis can be done with vehicle near misses, but in this study we're focusing mainly on pedestrians because that's where there's the highest need for these rare crash types. So they were in the same locations, but there were 39 near misses and only 27 crashes over the course of 9 years. That's 1 day of near misses versus almost a decade of crash data where we have more of these events. So that brings me to the highway safety management process and how near miss can be used to implement into this common practice for us safety engineers. I particularly think near miss is helpful for safety effectiveness evaluation. Right now it takes almost 3 years, maybe more, to get good crash data to assess the effectiveness of a treatment, such as a roundabout or a pedestrian hybrid beacon, etc. Nevertheless, with near misses, this could be done in just a couple of days. All right, so back to those takeaways. Pedestrian crashes, they're pretty random events, but nevertheless, the fatalities are an increasing concern. Proactive approaches, they can be used to help justify safety improvements, and near miss and predictive analysis can help aid in that proactive but yet data-driven safety decisions. So thank you guys very much. Happy to take any questions or elaborate on anything.
Great. Thanks, Ron. Great presentation. So we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions unless Brent is here. Nope. Okay. I saw some people. You almost came up and presented. I saw your hand go up first. So, but that's okay. We're gonna make this work. I have no worries on that. But let's go ahead and open it up for questions for our two presenters so far. And if that doesn't get us to the end, I have another thing in mind that we're going to open this thing up into an impromptu roundtable, because you got some really cool people over here talking about bike, ped, and active transportation. I'm going to throw myself in the mix as a presenter as well, but that's if we need it. So we'll start off. So first question right here.
Yeah, basically, what is Beltline doing to address connectivity to the Beltline from the public right-of-way network, and are there improvements to the public right-of-way network to facilitate that connectivity and access? Is that fair, Eric? Okay. We have in our program of projects about 46 miles of streetscape and complete street projects that we're supposed to be doing. That comes ultimately from the original 5-year redevelopment plan from 2005. The funding stream isn't there for it. So wherever we can make some quick little improvements to the adjacent public roadway, we have, but they've been kind of few and far between. So for example, the most recent is Marietta Boulevard, where we're building the Westside Trail main line. We've got a couple crossings and access points that we're creating across Marietta Boulevard. One's at a townhouse development, one's farther south at Hall Place. We're putting in, if we didn't do the raised intersections there, it was because of the truck traffic. We had a plan to do it, and then I'm not sure if we were allowed to do it. But we also have the rapid flash beacons. So you push the button, you get the rapid flash, and just, you still got to make sure that no idiot's going to blow through you as your rapid flash, right, is going on. So Irwin Street, for example, one of the first segments of the Beltline, we made some modifications to curb lines there, put in that raised crossing, actually a little bit after the fact, because we were having some conflicts. And just kind of an aside to what Ron was talking about, probably once a week we get a phone call from the population, the citizens, right? You guys have got to do something about Irwin Street. It is amazingly unsafe. Well, it actually isn't. The crash data isn't there. There's high levels of frustration on all sides, right? Because you get some jackass in a kit on his 10-speed going 30 miles an hour through there. You got a family of 4 walking across. Nobody pushes the buttons for the rapid flash beacon. And cars are jammed between 2 all-way stops. And so we've actually kind of backed into a European plaza where everybody kind of exists on the same, it's democracy in the public right-of-way, let's call it that. And so it's actually really safe because everybody is stopped or going relatively low speed. So there's the perception of unsafe because of all the vehicle conflicts, so to speak, but in reality, it's actually one of the safer locations where we have an at-grade crossing. But to your ultimate question, we try to do a lot of the planning work, and we have some designs for complete streets. We don't really have a funding stream to implement them, unfortunately. Gotcha. Okay. So from a trailhead perspective, then what we try to do is we try to max out at an 8-foot connection. So our trail paving typical section is 14 feet of concrete trail paving with a 3-foot shoulder on either side. So that's 20-foot swath. It doesn't make sense to us to have a 15-foot sidewalk connection into a 14-foot concrete path. Pont City Market, for example, I think has a 6 or 8 foot connection that gets you from the shed to the Eastside Trail. There's other locations on the west side. We've built like the staircase and ramp at Lawton Street, for example. I think the Lawton Street ramp is a 10-foot wide ramp because it is so long and it's intended for bikes. We want that to be a two-way facility, so 10 feet. We have connections to neighborhoods and apartment complexes that are 5-6 feet wide. We try to err on the side of low to kind of focus. And then we try to have a block structure as well. So again, to that street for cars, we're not looking to have a driveway, so to speak, like every 50 feet. We spread it out so that we have somewhere on the order of, 200 feet, 300 feet, 250, somewhere in that ballpark is kind of the block structure cadence that we like to have. So if a development is significantly long enough in terms of its frontage, it might get 2. But for the most part, we're just trying to focus people so that, it's smooth.
Just gonna pass it all around. Dwayne, we'll go with you next. And I'm trying to figure out if it would be worthwhile bringing you the mic or not, but we'll just repeat the question as long as we'll repeat the question. So go ahead, Dwayne.
Sure. Dwayne has asked me to elaborate on some of the softwares and technologies that GDOT has explored for near miss. There's a variety of different ones out there, and GDOT even has their own. We've had a study with Georgia Tech where we have our own software that can be used to detect near misses. There's a variety of different vendors. They each have their own things they can detect. Some of them within IT today that I encourage you to talk to. All these vendors, they have different products and advertise it different ways. Some are for continuous monitoring of near misses. That's, on sites where we're not getting much of a safety concern, but need to see if it's there. On the site I showed today, we knew a safety concern was there and are implementing improvements actively, so it offered a good test ground to use this near miss software on there because we know there's going to be conflicts occurring and we're actively trying to prevent them.
All right, next question. Bill?
This is a question for Ron.
All right.
If we're working with a small municipality, county, someone who's not on the state system, are there any programs we can take advantage of to help them with the sorts of analyses that you've been describing that work with the safety program? Just want to know how I can best help my clients.
Sure. So many of these different municipalities have contracts with the safety program where we invite them to leverage proactive techniques to improve safety. There's new federal funding coming in specifically for bicycle and pedestrian and safety in general. So therefore, there's new funding streams, especially for these local agencies, to help get their own funding from the federal government, but also leverage our own. And these proactive safety assessments are really the direction GDOT is steering, especially for pedestrian crashes. And Sam, if you have anything to add on that.
Thanks, Ron. So what Ron was alluding to in terms of the new funding from the IIJA is the Safe Streets for All grant. There is a buttload of money that's coming down the pipeline in terms of the federal government. And when it's not just $1 million here or there, it's $1 billion per year is what they're setting aside. And this is only available to local governments or tribes or MPOs. The state cannot touch this money. And that's a great thing because it offers a lot of opportunity for local governments to be able to capitalize on these funds, to be able to get improvements that fit their needs. And that's particularly important. So, and I'll even highlight one thing that really helps along that way, Bill, is being able to produce a document such as like a local road safety plan for that local government that highlights the needs, the safety needs for that particular government or entity or whatever the case may be. That goes a long way because the Safe Streets for All grant, you have to have that document in order to access the construction funds in that. So I think it's like 40% can be used towards actually building a safety plan, and the rest of it's for actually the construction of it. So that's definitely one of the first places that we're going to point people to say, look, there's a great opportunity. It's open right now. I think it ends in September. They're probably going to push it, but you didn't hear that from me. But that's a good opportunity. In terms of the state level, One of the unique features of the safety program is that we can actually touch state routes and non-state routes. So there's a lot of flexibility, as Ron was alluding to, in terms of the safety program that we would be able to assist. We spend probably 7 to 10% of our annual budget each year on off-system safety projects. Now, it depends what kind of project you're looking at. There's 2 different avenues that you can go down. For easy projects, easy in the sense of like within the right-of-way, there's a dedicated pathway that we have within the DOT that we can accomplish those in any given year. It's really just reaching out to us, and we can help facilitate those conversations. If it's a larger project, it really gets back to what Ron stated in his presentation too, is the data-driven decisions behind it. Is this a location that, because the safety program has a large budget. You look at it at face value, you're like, that's a lot of money each year to be spending on it, but take into account that it's for all roads in Georgia. So it's not as much as you think in terms of getting you everywhere that you need to go in terms of designing, doing the PE on it all the way out through construction. So if it's a larger project, we still want to have those conversations because there still could be a great partnership. And we've done that a lot recently is partnering up with the local government and telling them, look, if you do the PE, we'll throw this percentage of construction dollars into the project. And most of the time we have that conversation, it's well received, and they definitely take advantage of that. So those are the 3 options I would throw out there. There's some other ones, but hopefully that was a pretty comprehensive answer on that one. So. Oh, wow. Okay. Red shirt. There we go.
Sure. So Tom's question is maintenance. I don't have a per mile cost for maintenance off the top. Our funding stream relies on a tax allocation district, and that tax allocation district is for capital projects only, for implementation of new infrastructure. So technically we've done a couple capital maintenance projects where we've been able to figure some stuff out and get that to work. But they are capital projects that are achieving a greater good. The intention from the beginning was that the tax allocation district would generate the funds to fund the infrastructure, but that it would always be a city obligation for maintenance. So from that kind of point of departure, that is why the Beltline typologies and the materials palette it's a concrete paved surface. It's got welded wire mesh in it for crack control. It's a 6-inch slab, so it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's built on top of I think off the top, it's a 10-inch GAB, base over a compacted sub base. So from that perspective, we have a pretty solid trail that isn't going to go anywhere based upon the typical loadings that trail users are going to do it. We've got a couple places where we partnered with Georgia Power. We put in an 8-inch slab. We rebar the cold joints. And because they're going to be bringing heavier vehicles onto it for their maintenance of their transmission lines or their substations, whatever they need to get at. All of our stuff is set up for H20 loading. Our bridges, we own a bunch of bridges, some that have been there 100 years. And we're actually in a bridge inspection program right now. And it's a multi-year type of program. All that's to say is we're looking to identify what the risks are. We have 15 years of trail building experience, plus our partnership with the Path Foundation is helping us out on that as well. I can get back to you in terms of a cost per mile from a maintenance perspective.
Yeah, I think that's important moving forward is we're actually working with alpha level inspection because of what that knowledge is.
Yeah, and so I guess I was going at it from an infrastructure maintenance cost kind of a perspective. We do partner with Trees Atlanta, so they're under contract for the purposes of maintaining the trees and the ground plane. So they remove invasives, they prune the trees back as needs be. For the most part, they're not doing the shrubbery kind of stuff. Nobody giggles when I said shrubbery. Come on, people. This is comedy gold. Anyways, I'll get you some numbers, Tom.
Not to backtrack on the question real fast, but Bill, to answer another part of your question that I forgot to mention, and this everybody, this is an opportunity for everybody and anybody, but the safety program actually will purchase safety equipment for local governments or whomever, and for others to install. And that ranges from a wide variety of things. The most popular ones right now: speed feedback signs, RFBs, PHBs, including the mast arm. We'll purchase that as well. So that's a great opportunity to take advantage of that for your clients as well. All right, questions? Tom, let's do that one.
So this came up in a webinar I went to pretty recently on e-bikes. There's different classes of e-bikes. I can't remember the speed breakdown off the top of my head, but they divide them up into various different classes. And I know these companies such as, Jump and Bird, they have regulations on the speeds they can go in certain areas. Well, maybe that shouldn't just be speed regulations from those companies, but actual city ordinances on where these can be traveling fast or not. But e-bikes in general, they're promoting, people are more likely to use these as an active mode of transportation, since it's just difficult to get from point A to point B with biking sometimes, especially if it gets hilly on your path. So e-bikes are encouraging those active modes, and they're certainly still active regardless of whether there's an assisted part to it. But yeah, those ones that are more mopeds, not class, there's a different class of e-bike for those, so they're kind of separated from the bike advocacy that we're hearing. Anyone have a follow?
Beltline has a policy, no motor vehicles on the Beltline. The exceptions to that are motorized wheelchairs and maintenance trucks. Where'd Tom go? Oh. So like Cheese Atlanta has a pickup truck, right? We're not going to keep ambulances off the trail either if that should tragically arise. Atlanta Police Department, the Path Force specifically, is the precinct or the group assigned to patrol the Beltline. They have interpreted that to mean internal combustion. So motorized vehicles on the Beltline are prohibited if they are internal combustion. That's how APD can differentiate and kick somebody off or make an arrest or give a ticket or slap a wrist, whatever the approach may be. We have kicked around for a while whether there should be a speed limit on the Beltline. And with the regulated Jump, Bird, Lime scooters that have to get a permit from the city, they're geofenced, so they can only go, I don't know what it is, 9 miles an hour on the Beltline. But that doesn't regulate privately owned Bird scooter type of things or the e-bikes you're talking about, Tom. We don't really have a legitimate means for APD to address that. There are the different classes, and originally the jump scooters and whatnot were not allowed on the Beltline until they were permitted by the city, and so they changed kind of all of the vending rules within the city parks departments and right-of-way to deal with that kind of decentralized transportation, for lack of better terminology, and it's had a trickle effect out onto the trail. And now you've got people with gigantic radio DJ kind of things standing on, they're straddling a single wheel and they're not looking side to side, they're just going. And to each their own. One of the things that we found on the Eastside Trail during COVID was that the number of users dropped significantly total. There was always it's like a river. There's a base flow, right? and in some cases that base flow was complete douchebaggery. And what ended up happening was, as the total value of users dropped, the percentage of the douchebags rose significantly. That's been a problem for us.
I can't wait to see that in a line graph and a presentation in the future. That's going to be great. All right, let's take our next question. Andrew, go ahead.
Sure. So there's actually a lot of pretty documented measures, ways to utilize these different predictive approaches. Some you can gauge the kind of a weighted average of that prediction for crash frequency and your observed crash frequency from those historical records. That's pretty documented in the Highway Safety Manual. There's other ways you measure the difference between those observed and the predicted. So that tells you where there's the most potential for improvement. Okay, this type of scenario was supposed to have a couple of crashes on it, but now it actually had 10. So that's another way of gauging it. When you use predictive alone or near miss alone, that's in scenarios where you're addressing the safety of a site and you're looking at the pedestrian safety when there's no crash data to supplement it. So there's benefits to using just predictive alone, but if you're doing a network screening, we're working on various ways to integrate these predictive methods into our new metric platform. It's just a little bit of the ways down the line that will help for easy predictive screening to gauge in more complex analysis for network screenings.
All right, who's next? Right here. Oh, yeah, no, go ahead.
This is not what Ron was just talking about, but to my previous point, what we see, and to a certain extent, Tom, this is really getting at, it's a second point to your question. Whatever, as a recreational sociologist, whatever issues we see on the public right-of-way, just right in society, that also translates into the Beltline, right? So there's always going to be somebody that's just not driving correctly for the conditions, whether they're going too fast, too slow, weaving, whatever, right? That exists. Then you've got, I guess I'm going to upset another group of people. You've got the people with the big-ass pickup trucks that just love to, what do they call it, roll coal, or just the big mufflers. You get a silencer or you get a loudener. All that stuff that exists out on the public right-of-way and the street network has its analogous entity on the Beltline corridor, good, bad, or otherwise.
All right, Rhea.
So the question is, what about single-family residential zoning, and is there a movement afoot to change that out? The city of Atlanta has been talking for at least 20 years about completely rewriting its zoning ordinance. Every time they attempt to do it and find the funding to do it, they bang up against, guess who? The single-family residential neighborhoods of the city of Atlanta. They are the boon and bane of the city's existence. They define the city and get in the way of the city, and it's not necessarily a healthy tension, but it is not necessarily an unhealthy one either, because of the different cultures and ambiances that each one of the individual neighborhoods ends up bringing to the city collective. We define 45 unique, discrete neighborhoods around the Atlanta Beltline. We actively look to support, and it's like a buttressing of some, and others are just fine as they are. But there's a constant communication. Atlanta Beltline is not looking to change that. We are looking more at derelict properties, large empty industrial swaths, which there are a ton of around the Beltline. And so I showed two examples there, and those are not derelict, right? Well, one of them, well, actually, neither of them at this point. Those graphics were from a long time ago, but they're, explanatory and exemplary, right? to your question, we're not looking to take down the single-family residential. That's probably a bridge too far in the city of Atlanta. You've seen it in Minneapolis. You've seen it in other, let's go with extremely progressive city governments. I don't think we're going to find that within the city of Atlanta because Atlanta is so defined by its individual single-family neighborhoods. And I think you'll also see that our most recent planning commissioner is no longer our planning commissioner.
All right, we got room for a couple more questions before we end today. All right, we're going back to you.
As far as the redevelopment goes, what kind of densities are you seeing?
Over time, it's actually been increasing. When the Beltline inclusionary zoning ordinance was passed, let's say that was 4 years ago at this point-ish, all for rent units, all for rent developments along the Beltline stopped for like a year and a half because nobody wanted to be the first one to be, let's say, from their perspective, victim to the IZ. And they didn't want to be the first to start to, from their perspective, lose the money, right? Then and so there were a lot of people that were doing stacked flats. And you're lucky if you get 10 units, maybe 12 units per acre on that kind of a product, as opposed to, we'd call them the Texas Donut or land yachts, where you've got, a 500 unit apartment complex that 5-story on a podium wraps a parking deck, and you're getting somewhere closer to, 50 units per acre or whatever. From a transit perspective, we are trying to get that density as high as we can, but it doesn't have to be one density and then extrude that. So from an urban design perspective, you'd want that to be closest to where your transit stop is planned, and then you kind of trickle down from a density perspective before you build up to the next one on either side. But yeah, right now though, we're seeing a ton of for rent stuff that's going up. We're seeing a bunch of office development, especially on the Eastside Trail. That's spec, right? What was the Murder Kroger is now 725 Ponce. That was an office tower. I think it's 10 or 11 stories over the top of the new Kroger. And that was built on spec, just based upon, the Ponce City Market project across the trail, that they were going gangbusters there from an office perspective. And so they're like, well, let's build 725, and they filled it up almost, pre-construction pricing. Why wouldn't you buy in? But now the same developer, Jim Irwin at New City, is doing down at Ralph McGill in the old Georgia Power laydown yard there. He's got several acres of property, and he's gone vertical with his phase 1. There's still 2 more phases to go, and there's close to 1 million square feet of stuff. And so you've got office, residential, commercial, and a whole bunch of public amenity kind of stuff. And all the public amenity stuff was front-loaded so that it is available to everybody as quick as possible. So that's been absolutely fantastic. And the densities over there are, again, not just residential, but they're very large. And it's, from my perspective, it's wonderful.
All right, we're going to wrap up. I do have a quick announcement. The volleyball, which is supposed to start at 1, is getting pushed to 1:15, I believe. So that's a nice breather. In terms of, at least me personally, I'm going to present in the next session. I was like, I'm going to have to run and go get ready real fast. But it did get pushed, so that's good news just for everyone to know. With that, I really want to thank our speakers today. I think they had outstanding presentations. Let's give one more round of applause for our speakers.